Okay, such an unbelievable turnout on New Year's Day. Wow. Baruch Hashem. So we have in this week's parasha is the concluding parasha of Sefer Bereshit. Sefer Bereshit is, I think many people, I can't speak for everybody, but it's the one that is filled with all the stories. And these stories that we read them, a lot of times they're entertaining, they're dramatic, they're inspiring. But I think what's most important about Sefer Bereshit is that, as my Rabbi says, it is the book in which we begin to see the formation of the Jewish DNA. Because it begins to be a focus on the characters and where the Jewish people essentially, how they were formed and how they came about. Starting from Abraham all the way to Yaakov and then Yosef. And in this week's parasha, Yaakov, prior to his death, he gathers all his children and he's about to give them, as Unkulu says, he's about to give them lessons that he wants them to take away for their own life and for their tribe. He wants to deliver a message for them. And as he gathers them, he starts with the oldest. Now, who's the oldest out of everybody? Reuven. Reuven is the oldest. And right away, Yaakov Avinu doesn't play games. He's very concise, he's to the point, and he also doesn't hold back. And as he begins with Reuven, he tells them the following. He says, Reuven, Bechori ata. Bechor means you are my firstborn. Kohi verishit oni yeter se'et v'yeter az. This is not simple Hebrew. This Hebrew is a little bit more challenging, but if I will paraphrase, he tells them the following. Reuven, you are my firstborn. You are my strength, my initial vigor, and he says to him, you are destined and privileged to actually have two very specific roles within the Jewish nation. So first, he's a bechor, means he's the firstborn, which comes with certain rights, but he's also supposed to be a king, and he was also supposed to be the one that gets the status of priesthood. So he's supposed to have two major prominent positions, and as a result of his behavior, he lost them. Now, so he tells them the following. He tells them, Pahaz kamayim al totar, ki alita mishkeve avicha, az hilalta yetzuri ala. Again, this is not simple Hebrew, but he says to him the following. He says, you are impulsive like water, you are unstable like water. He tells us to the firstborn. Then he says, those privileges that were rightfully once yours, you are no longer going to benefit from those. And they're no longer yours. You've lost them, he tells him. And the reason why is because of one very specific sin that he did. And what was the sin that he did? When Rachel passed away and she died, she was the main woman of the house. Now, Yaakov had 4 wives, and each wife had her own tent. And occasionally, Yaakov Avinu, his bed would be in different tents, but primarily it would be in the tent of Rachel. Now, Rachel had a maidservant, her name was Bilhah, and Leah, who was the second main wife, had a maidservant, and her name was Zilpah. And when Rachel passed away, Yaakov's bed was in Bilhah's tent. Now, Rachel, since she was the main wife, after she passed away, her sister Leah is the next in line. Although it's not most common knowledge, but the maidservants were also sisters because they were Lavan's daughters as well from different women. They were daughters from concubines. But the main woman now is essentially Leah. Now, Leah had 6 boys, starting with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, Zvulun. And so, when Rachel passed away, Reuven sees that his father's bed Yaakov is in it's in Bilhah's tent. She's the maidservant of Rachel. So, what did he do? He took the bed out of Bilhah's tent and he put his father's bed in Leah's tent, in his mother's tent. Rashi gives us insight on this. And this was a pretty severe sin. What does Rashi say? He says, Pahaz Kamayim. Pahaz Kamayim, we said Reuven was unstable like water. He was impulsive, right? He didn't think through things. הפחז והבהלה אשר מיהרת להראות כעסך כמים הללו הממהרים למרוצתם לכך אל תותרם. For this reason you lost. In other words, what is he saying? You were quick and you were impulsive and you showed your anger. What anger did he show? In that he took his father's bed and he put it in his mother's tent. What anger is Rashi talking about here? What is exactly taking place? So we're trying to understand what kind of anger here Reuven is actually experiencing. When Yaakov also speaks to Reuven, why does he tell him you're the firstborn? Everybody knows that. He's the firstborn. What benefit or what profit do we have from Reuven, right? From the verse telling us Reuven is the firstborn. It's obvious. And I think the thing that I really want to focus on is Reuven was supposed to have the 3 biggest positions. A king, a priesthood, he was supposed to obtain priesthood, and lastly, he's supposed to be the firstborn. He lost all 3. And when you look at it, you say, wait a second, okay, he sinned, but it doesn't seem like the punishment fits the crime. It seems he got heavily punished, and we need to get some clarification. Why is it that Yaakov chose actually to rid him of those privileges? That's something we really need to understand. I want to preface, and this is important, Reuven did tshuva, and I'm going to speak about Reuven's tshuva a little bit later, because he did a very unique form of tshuva that was different than others who did tshuva. However, it was inadequate to a certain extent. But it was a very unique form of tshuva that he did. Let's start with the following. The Rabbi tells us Reuven was impulsive. He was unstable like water. What's unique about water? If you ever swim in the ocean, it's unpredictable. You don't know where the current is going, you don't know when it's going to shift. I mean, you could see, but you don't. I once got drifted away because I totally misread the ocean, pretty far out. And the reality is, it's very unstable and unpredictable. You don't know. In fact, anytime water has an ability to enter somewhere, it enters. It can get into areas in which no other liquid can possibly get into, due to its strength, due to its consistency, due to the fact that it spreads everywhere it goes, which means it's very unstable. Can you imagine? Typically speaking, the oldest son, right, is the one that is supposed to be the leading example for the whole family. He's the one that he tends to be, generally speaking, tends to be responsible, tends to be organized, right, tends to be hardworking. There's even in siblings, there's a dynamic. There's the oldest child, then there's the middle child who's a little more wild. Then you have the third child where he thinks that his existence in this world is that he's doing a favor to the world because he exists, that everything comes to him. So you have these natural sibling dynamics, right? But here we see a total fail by Reuven. So I want to start with the following. Reuven was very sensitive. He possessed a degree of sensitivity that even though ended up a liability for him, it could have been an asset for him. I'll explain what this means. Let me start with the following. After Reuven sinned, right, and he removed the bed, the Torah tells us the following. Yosef was about to be sold. The brothers, when they saw Yosef approach, they said, "Oh, look, here is this dreamer coming along." And two brothers, particularly Shimon and Levi, said, "Let's kill him." Reuven steps in and says, we can't spill blood. So what does Reuven do? He takes Yosef and he puts him in the pit. The Torah testifies and Hashem testifies, and he says that Reuven saved Yosef right then and there. He did save him. There's no question about it. However, he left. Now, when he left, why did he leave? So the Torah tells us he went to do tshuva. For what? For changing the beds. I want to ask a question here. Rashi tells us that when Yosef was in there, the reason Reuven saved him is because, this is what Rashi says. Reuven says, "I am the oldest. If anything wrong happens to Yosef, I'll be responsible. It's going to look bad on me, not on anybody else." This what propelled him and drove him to save Yosef. Even though at that time Yosef was the favorite. That's what it appeared like. So he goes and he says, "I can't take this chance. I have to save my brother." So he does save him from the hands of his other brothers. However, then he leaves Yosef in the pit. Now, why did he leave him? So the rabbis explain. He says, "Look, Shimon and Levi, they're hotheads. They have a bad temper. Let them cool down. Let them cool off. And then I'll come back and I'll give Yosef and I'll bring him back to father." But in the moment, he was in a hurry to do what? Tshuva. He wants to go do tshuva. I want to ask a simple question. If your brother right now is in trouble, and all the other brothers are very angry with him, and you're observing this situation, yes, you have a need to do tshuva. And although, a person always needs to be in a state of where he can do tshuva, but right now someone is in trouble. I'll give you an example. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they got to the water, and the Egyptians are running behind them, and they're screaming to Moshe that the Egyptians we just left Mitzrayim, they chased us to the water, now we're about to die. Either we're going to the water or we die. You have to help us. Moshe Rabbeinu begins praying. God tells him, "Why are you praying to me? Go in the water." Meaning there's a time for a person to pray, and there's time for action. There's a time, just like you have a time to pray, there's a time for action. There's a time for you to engage in tshuva and to work on yourself, and there's a time where your brother's in need. If your brother is in need, set aside your own personal situation with yourself, take him out of the pit, and bring him back to your father. He doesn't do that. Why? Because what was he being consumed by? How he is right. What made him save Yosef is, how am I going to look? How am I going to look on the outside? How am I going to be perceived? That's what drove him to save Yosef. But the job wasn't done because Reuven was so much consumed. I have to do tshuva. And that's fine. Go do tshuva. But not while your brother is in trouble. His decision to go and do tshuva on the expense of his brother being in trouble, even though he did save him, is, you see, where his decision making wasn't the right decision to make. This is the first story. I'll tell you a second story. You know, when Yosef was the viceroy of Egypt, he waited for his brothers to finally show up because there's starvation in the world. And they do. And what happens after he waits? He recognizes his brothers and they don't recognize him. And he tells them, you guys are spies. So we're not spies. We're 12 boys of one man, and we came to get food just like everybody else. And if that's the case, then he says, prove to me that you guys are 12. Go get me the young brother Binyamin. And in the meantime, he took Shimon, incarcerated him, right, in front of their face, although it was when they left, he took him out of prison, but he put him temporarily in prison when they were there. Bring to me your other brother, Binyamin, because I don't believe you guys are 12. So, and I'm making this short, they go back home, and Yaakov hears what happens, and he's furious. He's very upset. Yosef is gone. Right now, Shimon, his son, is in prison, and you want to take Binyamin, my son, the last remnants of Rachel, who's my favorite wife. He's the only thing I have left. Yosef disappeared on the road. Rachel passed away on the road. You want me to give you Binyamin on the road as well? So he was filled with doubt, with anxiety, and rightfully so. He says, under any circumstances, I'm not doing it. Comes Reuven into the picture and says, Abba, give me Binyamin. I am going to bring him back to you. And if I don't, you can kill both of my kids. Yaakov hears it. And this is what Yaakov says. It's very interesting. Yaakov says, no, I'm not doing that. And he says, you are the Bechor that's a fool. It's very interesting. What's a Bechor that's a fool? Being a fool is being a fool. Shoteh means being a fool. But you are a Bechor that's a fool, he tells him. He says, your children are not my children. They're his continuation. They're Yaakov's continuation. But I think there's another message here. If somebody were to say that, you say, I'm tasking you with getting my son, but if you fail, then you can kill my children. What does that show? That your relationship with your children is not the one that I want you to be the savior of my child. Because if you're willing to give up the life of your children, then how can you go and save my child? It didn't make sense to Yaakov. Very hard to understand. The response of, you can kill my kids, is that a well thought out response? Or does that rather appear in haste, or appears like it was impulsive in the moment because we have to get food. We have to make sure that we won't starve to death. On the flip side, Yehuda, his brother, they told him, Yehuda, you're the leader here. Although he wasn't the firstborn. Typically the firstborn is the leader, but Yehuda ended up being the leader. He was always viewed as such by his brothers. Yehuda says, no, we're going to wait this one out. I'm not speaking to Pops. Why? Well, right now we got food. Because we came back. Let's wait until the quantity diminishes of the food. Then, Father's going to say, you're going to need food. Go to Mitzrayim. Now he's coming to me. I'm not going to him. Anytime in negotiation, if someone is coming to you, then you're in a position of power in negotiation. But if you're going to someone, they're typically in a position of power. So Yehuda waited. Let's wait until the food diminishes. This is exactly what Yehuda did. And then Yaakov, as he predicted, go get food. Now Yehuda steps into the plane and says, Abba, I want to get food, but there's a problem. The guy in Egypt, Yosef, and nobody knows Yosef, says, I don't want to see your face if you don't bring Binyamin with you. We can't go up there. And he sees his father's face. And he says, look, if we don't bring Binyamin, we're going to starve. Because we don't have food. It ran out. And that's for sure a death sentence. But if you bring Binyamin with us, And while you have valid anxiety towards Binyamin, maybe something will happen, maybe something won't. But here you have a guaranteed consequence of starvation. And here we can save not just ourselves, you, but also the babies that are with us. And then Yehuda comes in with his masterpiece. He says, Abba, I am guaranteeing, it's a guarantee that I'm going to bring back Binyamin. I'm his guarantor, and if I don't, I will be sinful for the rest of my life. To you, and I'll be sinful in the world to come, and to you. That means I'm going to lose my world to come, and I'm going to lose this world, because I have a responsibility to bring them. I'm guaranteed. Some of you maybe not know this, but if someone wants to guarantee something, let's say, for example, Be'ezrat Hashem, you're all going to be very successful, but let's say in the beginning, you want to get a loan from the bank. The bank says, look, you're hardworking, you're young, and you even have a good credit score, but you don't have history. We want to give you the money, but the problem is we can't take a chance. You're going to need to get a guarantor. So you're going to get somebody who has a good credit score, has history. You want to get somebody to make sure that the bank feels secure giving out the loan. Is what I'm saying clear? But why would someone sign off for you? You know why? Because they believe in you as the person. Anytime a guarantor comes in, it's not so much as there is an aspect of evaluating the deal, the numbers, but more than anything else, the guarantor is you're signing with somebody who you trust. It's the trust that someone, it's a feeling that someone gives you. Yehuda gave this feeling to Yaakov. I am going to guarantee it. You want to know what's the difference? I'll tell you the difference. Reuven, let's say right now, obviously they don't know it's Yosef. Right now, Reuven is about to go to Yosef and demanding to get Binyamin back, and they're about to get into a war and fight. So now, Reuven, if it comes down to him potentially dying, he would think twice. Why? Because not only he's not going to bring back Binyamin, but he's going to die, and then both of his kids are going to die. So you're looking at 3 children of Yaakov potentially dying, and Binyamin not coming back. Which means, when push comes to shove, he's going to fold. Reuven is going to fold. Now let's bring Yehuda. What's Yehuda's mindset? I'm guaranteeing it. What does that mean, I'm guaranteeing it? It means it's going to happen. Which means Yehuda's not afraid to die. He's fully committed. It's going to happen. He doesn't care. Nothing's going to hold him back because he's guaranteeing that he's going to come back. I'm doing whatever it takes to make sure that he comes back. I don't care what happens to my life, but he is coming back. That's a whole different mindset. So from here you see Reuven, the mistake he made. And his father totally disregarded him. These 2 examples that I just presented here with Reuven are very painful. What Yaakov is telling him is everybody can be impulsive. You know who's also impulsive? Shimon and Levi, the 2 brothers that decimated the city of Shechem. The difference between them and Reuven, both got angry. But they were right in their action and wrong in their motivation. Reuven was wrong in his action. Why? Why was Reuven wrong in his actions? Why are we so upset? The Gemara tells us something very interesting. Do you know why he took out the beds? The reason he took out the beds is because he took it as a personal affront to him. My mother is the main wife, and now she's going to be second to the maidservant? What does that also show? That if my mother is downgraded, then who's also downgraded? I'm downgraded. But wait a second, Reuven. What was Reuven's intention? He had a good intention. He's doing what? He wants to protect the honor of his mother. Because he feels like, now my mother, it appears like she's being downgraded. How could it be? So what is he doing? He's protecting her honor, her position. But Reuven, where was he impulsive? Okay, you want to protect your mother's honor? That's fair. You know what could he have done? Abba, go have a conversation with him. Go have a conversation with your father. Don't unilaterally go inside the tent, take the bed out, and then, as a result, decide I'm going to put it in my mother's tent. Your father also has a perspective, just like your mother? Did you maybe think for a second that maybe it's a possibility, I don't know, I'm just suggesting it. His bed was there because he understood this what God wanted him to do it? Because the rabbis tell us that the divine providence, the Shekhinah, rested upon that tent at that moment, so he understood I need to put my bed in there. But did you also take into consideration that Yaakov deeply missed Rachel? And one of the ways that he can feel somewhat consoled is by spending time with the maidservant who's always close with Rachel. There's many things. But what did you decide? No. You decided that there's only one person, which is your mother, and that she was offended. And then you acted upon it. You decided that Yosef is in trouble. He was in trouble, but you decided doing tshuva comes before. But there's another perspective. You know the brothers are very upset. You also decided that the children, 2 of your boys, should die if you don't bring them back to Yaakov. Did you consider that Yaakov's, your children are Yaakov's children? You know where all this comes from? And this is where I say, this is unstable like water. Here's where this comes from. Reuven, in all of these 3 scenarios, he was extremely sure that he is right. When does a person feel like they're right? When the motivation of doing something feels righteous or feels right. There's a sense of rationalizations that goes into play. What feels right? I gotta do tshuva. I have to work on myself because I did a sin. That feels very right. I need to go and do it. I need to make sure. Now, being that I'm the oldest of the family, we need to make sure we get food. We gotta take Binyamin with us. And if I don't bring Binyamin back, take my children. That sense of, I'm willing to sacrifice my children, outwardly it appears like it's righteous, it's the right thing. But it's not. And lastly, your father. What feels right? I'm protecting my mother's honor. That feels very right. But what about the other perspective? Which means, what he lost, and oftentimes, the things that we tend, I think, this is very important, the biggest things that we can lose in life will often comes for the things that feel as if they're righteous, as if they are right, without considering that there's an additional perspective. You know where this actually manifests itself in real life? Maybe you've seen this when it comes to, for example, marriages. A husband and wife struggle maybe to get along, and then the parents get involved. The parents of the husband, let's say, look how she's treating my son, or the father, look how he's treating my daughter, and then they get involved. And it feels right because they're protecting their child. And they want to make sure their child is being treated with respect. They want to make sure, and that's understandable. But there's another perspective. There's the other spouse's side, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. And they might even be right. That could be the case. But what have you have done, essentially, once they find common ground and they get along, what kind of environment have you created now between the in-laws now and the spouse? It's an awful environment. So people oftentimes decide to get involved in these situations when really they're harming themselves. You know where that's also true? Between parents and children. You see this often as well. Where a lot of times, parents very much think that, well, you know what? I'll give you another example. In business. Why is this also common in business? Business, you have 2 partners, right? Who are trying to achieve the same goal. And then one partner unilaterally decides to do something without considering the other partner, without considering his perspective, without considering what's the right approach, and makes a decision that he thinks is right. Now, whether a person is right or not is one thing, but you always have to consider that there's another perspective in this case. So you see from here, and oftentimes this is how partnerships end up breaking up, and even good partnerships or successful partnerships, because one side totally disregards that there's another perspective, and unilaterally decides this is the right thing to do, it feels right. Reuven did tshuva. He worked on himself. My Rabbi said this. There's a midrash that says that Reuven, he's the first person to do tshuva. It's very hard to understand this midrash. Why? Because Adam HaRishon before him did tshuva. Cain before him did tshuva. That's the son of Adam. Ishmael did tshuva, the son of Abraham. He ended up doing tshuva. People did tshuva. So what does that mean? He's the first person to do tshuva. If you look closely, the common denominator between those who did tshuva previously, they did tshuva on the action, or the wrong action rather, that they took, or on something that they did that was wrong, did tshuva. You know what Reuven did tshuva? He did tshuva on his character deficiency. He had his character deficiency was that he was impulsive, is that he did jump to conclusion. He did tshuva on it, but it was still not enough. When Yaakov told him, you are impulsive, everybody can be impulsive, but if you are, you cannot be a king. If you're impulsive, you can't be a king. And if you're impulsive, you can't take the share of the priesthood. Why? What's unique about these two things? A king is somebody who not only he's not allowed to be impulsive, everything he does, he's a servant of the people. Everything a king needs to do needs to be in the best interest of the people. And not only that, behind his actions, his motivations also need to be pure. So it's a combination of the right actions with pure motivation. You see, with Shimon and Levi, they were reprimanded severely by Yaakov. In fact, if you look at the order, you have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. So the three positions or privileges that Reuven lost, where did they go? The firstborn went to Yosef. We're not going to talk about it today. However, next in line is Shimon. He doesn't get anything. He's the one who started up everything. He's the one who wanted to kill Yosef. He's the one who threw Yosef into the pit. He's the one that said, let's go decimate the city of Shechem. Because Levi, both Levi and Shimon, both of them together were criticized as brothers, not separately when Yaakov was spoken to them. So when they're both criticized, right, in unity, however, Levi does get the position of priesthood. Because Aaron Cohen comes from the tribe of Levi. Moshe comes from the tribe of Levi. He was different. Which also begs the question, if they're both guilty, why did one receive such a prominent role and the other didn't? We'll see if we can answer in a moment. And then, who's the fourth son? Yehuda. The royalty, the malchut, went right to Yehuda. What did I tell you about Yehuda a few moments ago? What does a king do? He removes himself completely out of the equation. What is good for the people? When Yehuda says, I'm guaranteeing that I'm bringing back Binyamin, that means whether I'm alive or dead, he's coming back. That means that Yehuda also has the ability to confess when he's wrong, like the story with Tamar. He says, the babies inside of her womb, they belong to me. And he was the sitting judge. And he could have easily pretended elsewhere, and he could have and she could have died. You could have given her the capital punishment. But what did he do as a result? He says, no, they're my children. And he embarrassed himself. But why? For the sake of doing what's right with the right motivation. Being a king means that not only I cannot be impulsive, I cannot allow anger or any form of emotion to control my decision making. It needs to be very pure. Throughout the whole story, this is what Yehuda has displayed. That type of behavior. This is why the king, the royalty went to him. He admitted when he was wrong. He stepped up to the plate. He was willing to die. He was willing to be a guarantor. Everything that drove Yehuda was, I have to do what's best for my family. It doesn't matter how I look. It's not about me. This is what Reuven lacked. Being impulsive is inconsistent with royalty and with being king. That's why he lost the kingship. The priesthood, you know what priesthood represents? What was the role of the priests? You sinned, you got to bring a korban, a sacrifice, right? Who's representing you? The Kohen or the tribe of Levi. They need to represent you, which means they are just a messenger. They don't have, there's nothing about them, right? That's personal. They totally have to serve the needs of the people by bringing the sacrifices. They, so much so that they're an extension of God's messengers. They're an extension of God himself. How do I know this? Every single tribe got a nahala, an inheritance. Every single tribe in the land of Eretz Israel. You know who didn't get an inheritance? The tribe of Levi. You know why? Because they don't have a covenantal relationship with God. They are an extension of God, the army. They're an extension of God, of who God is. Everything about it is they need to escort people. They need to make sure people align themselves correctly. How do I know this? Who was chosen to escort the Jewish people in the desert? Who was chosen to escort the Jewish people in the desert? Moshe. What tribe does he come from? Levi. It was never about, for Moshe, it was never about, it was always about others. You see how Moshe Rabbeinu always fought for the Jewish people, argued with God for the Jewish people. To be a priest, you have to, there's no sense of self. You are totally committed and dedicated to the Jewish people. In fact, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, if one of his relatives passes away, he doesn't go to the funeral. It's an unbelievable thing. So you see that position is meant for someone that you are totally a representative of the Jewish people. Similar to the king, they overlap in similarity, but they're not one and the same. But this is the tragedy of Reuven, and I'm going to conclude here. From here, I think the biggest thing to take out of here is Reuven was very impulsive, and sadly, he lost these three things. He did do tshuva on character deficiency, which is critical, because if you think about it, all of our actions and behaviors stem from our character. So if we can, from rather our character traits, if we can figure out which character traits brings about our sinful behavior, then that would oftentimes prevent a lot of sinful behavior, because I can figure out, oh, that's the character trait that brought me to this behavior, which is a tremendous thing. At the same time, every single person is a king in their home, which means we have to control our emotions. We have to control how we respond, even if we're annoyed, even if we're upset, how we speak, how we communicate. Every person, every Jew has that ability to manage his emotions and not act in an impulsive way that feels righteous. Because oftentimes we're going to justify, if something feels impulsive and righteous, it should be a red line or a light bulb for you. Wait a second. Impulsive and righteous at the same time doesn't feel right. Anything that's impulsive and feels righteous, you have to stay away from. You have to realize, is there another perspective that I'm missing here? Because everything Reuven did felt right. But it was the wrong thing to do. By Yehuda, everything he did was right. Because there was never a personal affront. He didn't take offense to him for all the sins, the things that he did, because he at least outwardly it feels like he might have sinned with Tamar, but he didn't. But he says, hey, what I did is wrong. By Reuven, everything was a personal affront. He was looking from inside himself. How am I being perceived? Oh, they're going to blame me for Yosef dying. I have to save him. But it didn't come from the right place. And this is where I'm going to conclude. This is why, in the beginning we said, does the punishment really fit the crime? It's not about whether the punishment fit the crime. The question is the character trait of being impulsive, is that befitting or consistent with being a king? And the answer is no. Is it consistent with getting the priesthood? The answer is no. It's not. And it's a very sad tragedy, but as Jews, we have to learn from this, not to be impulsive. You have to be very well thought out. I'm going to tell you one thing that I that I thought was very interesting that I learned. Rav Shimon said this in the synagogue. He said the IDF, when they make a mistake, whether it's embarrassing to them or whether it was the wrong thing, they always admit what they're doing wrong. What's beautiful about it is that they learn from it and they put in place the right type of measures to make sure it never happens again. This is why it's such a great army in that regard, that they are willing to admit wrongdoings, even if it's unpopular, even if there's morally there's issues, whatever it is. We made a mistake, we own up to it. We have to own up to it. This is what Yehuda was. This is how you make real genuine progress. Right? Zrat Hashem, obviously all these brachot that he gave, these were lessons, not just for them, but also for us.